Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Jawad and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says his government will not hold any dialogue with India until it restores the special status of occupied Kashmir. Answering public questions via telephone, the Prime Minister said India will fail in its efforts to counter the growing military and economic power of China. To a question, the Prime Minister said Pakistan will speak with Saudi Arabia and Turkey to galvanize support for Palestinians braving Israeli atrocities. Responding to another caller, he said Pakistan will try to garner support of Muslim countries to counter rising Islamophobia. Indian troops have martyred 3 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Islamabad district. The youths were targeted during a so-called cordon and search operation in Vailu area of the district. Occupying troops have killed more than 325 civilians since the revocation of the valley on 5th of August 2019. Gaza's health ministry has confirmed the killing of 28 people, including 10 children, since Monday as the Israeli military renewed its bombardment of the besieged strip. Over 150 Palestinians have been wounded in the strikes after Hamas launched rockets towards Israel in response to its aggression in occupied East Jerusalem. The Israeli military says Defense Minister Benny Gantz has called in troop reinforcements near the fence with Gaza. The latest escalation comes after weeks of tensions in Jerusalem, where several Palestinian families face eviction from homes to make room for Jewish settlers. The European Union and other regional countries have condemned Israeli aggression on Palestinians. Iran has rejected the U.S. Navy's claim that Iranian speedboats in the Strait of Hormuz sparked a tense encounter in the sensitive region. In a statement, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said the U.S. is guilty of using false narratives and should abide by international law. A day earlier, the U.S. had its Coast Guard ship fired warning shots when 2 of the Iranian boats came dangerously close. India has reported nearly 3,900 deaths from COVID-19 and almost 330,000 new infections overnight. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered 113 fatalities and nearly 3,100 coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. Globally, the COVID-19 has claimed more than 3.2 million lives and infected over 158 million people. And in boxing, a long-awaited world heavyweight title fight between British rivals Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua is set for Saudi Arabia in August. The announcement was made by Anthony Joshua's promoter, Eddie Hearn. The fight will see all 4 belts contested in a heavyweight bout for the first time. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Gaza's health ministry has confirmed the killing of 28 people, including 10 children, since Monday as the Israeli military renewed its bombardment of the besieged strip. Over 150 Palestinians have been wounded in the strikes after Hamas launched rockets towards Israel in response to its aggression in occupied East Jerusalem. The European Union and other regional countries have condemned Israeli aggression on Palestinians. The latest escalation comes after weeks of tensions in Jerusalem, where several Palestinian families face eviction from homes to make room for Jewish settlers. More than 300 Palestinians were wounded in the raids by Israeli forces at Al-Aqsa Mosque and elsewhere. On Monday, Hamas claimed to have fired rockets towards Israel after giving it an ultimatum to withdraw its forces from the mosque. Shortly afterwards, Israeli jets pounded the besieged Gaza Strip, prompting international calls for restraint. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Tel Aviv will step up airstrikes following the killing of 2 Israeli women in rocket attacks from Gaza. The Israeli army said in a statement the Defense Minister Benny Gantz has called in troop reinforcements near the fence with Gaza. Israel claims all of Jerusalem as its capital, a status not recognized internationally. Palestinians want East Jerusalem, captured by Israel in the 1967 Arab-Israel War, as the capital of a future independent state free of Israeli occupation. They have been incensed by Israeli court-ordered evictions there to make way for Jewish settlers. Moving on, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says its government will not hold any dialogue with India until it restores the special status of occupied Kashmir. Answering public questions via telephone, he said India will fail in its efforts to counter the growing military and economic power of China. Khan also voiced concerns over the maltreatment of Muslims and other minorities in India. He pointed out that international media had begun writing against the BJP's Hindutva policy, which Islamabad has raised on a global level. The Prime Minister said the Foreign Office had raised the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in an excellent manner on various forums. To another question, Khan said Pakistan will speak with Saudi Arabia and Turkey to galvanize support for Palestinians braving Israeli atrocities. He said Pakistan will try to garner support of Muslim countries to counter rising Islamophobia. Indian troops murdered 3 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Islamabad district. The youths were targeted during a so-called cordon and search operation in Vailu area of the district. The occupying troops have killed more than 325 civilians since the revocation of the valley on the 5th of August 2019. Meanwhile, Hurriyat leaders have strongly condemned India's growing state terrorism in the valley ahead of Eid al-Fitr. They also said the occupational authorities are expelling Muslim employees to get Indian citizens employed in Kashmir. In Russia, at least 11 people have been killed in a shooting at a school in southwest province of Kazan. Emergency service said some 32 others were wounded after 2 people opened fire. They reported that an explosion was heard in the school before the shooters opened fire. The police said they have killed one of the assailants and detained the other. They said the motive still remains unclear. Kazan is the capital of the Muslim-majority region of Tatarstan and is located around 725 kilometers east of Moscow. Iran has rejected the U.S. Navy's claim that Iranian speedboats in the Strait of Hormuz sparked a tense encounter in the sensitive region. In a statement, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said the U.S. is guilty of using false narratives and should abide by international law. A day earlier, the U.S. said its Coast Guard ship fired warning shots when the 2 of the Iranian boats came dangerously close. The exchange comes as Washington and Tehran are engaged in indirect talks in Vienna for the revival of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. France says a great deal still needs to be done to revive the Iran nuclear deal in a very short time frame. The Foreign Ministry also called on the UN nuclear watchdog and Iran to negotiate an extension to their technical bilateral accord. This comes a day after the EU said negotiations in Vienna are moving into an important stage. In a press briefing, EU Foreign Affairs Chief Joseph Borrell said the next few weeks will be critical to save the nuclear deal. Borrell made the remarks in Brussels following a meeting of EU foreign ministers. He also voiced optimism over a window of opportunity that he said will stay open for a couple of weeks. The U.S. has welcomed the Taliban's announcement of a 3-day ceasefire on Eid holiday and urged them to extend it. The State Department spokesperson said Washington calls on the Taliban and the Afghan leaders to engage seriously in the ongoing peace process. In a briefing, spokesperson Ned Price said the U.S. condemns attacks on girls' school in Kabul. Price noted despite troops' withdrawal, the U.S. is not disengaging from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad also welcomed the ceasefire decision by the Taliban and Kabul. However, he called for a permanent ceasefire and urged accelerated negotiations on a political settlement. Earlier, the Taliban released 33 soldiers from their prisons in Kabul, Uruzgan and Farah provinces. India has reported nearly 3,900 deaths from COVID-19 and almost 330,000 new infections overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.2 million lives and infected over 158 million people. More in this report.
As the coronavirus outbreak spreads into India's vast rural hinterland, dozens of bodies of people believed to have died from COVID-19 have washed up on the banks of the Ganges River. Outside the crematoriums, ambulances carrying bodies lined up as the country continues to struggle with overflowing hospitals and morgues. Doctors in India are warning against the practice of using cow dung in the belief it will ward off COVID-19. The government is under increasing pressure to impose a nationwide lockdown. However, the blanket curbs are increasing the vows of migrant workers. The Philippines and Argentina have each detected their first 2 cases of a coronavirus variant first identified in India.
I did financial work at a private company, but the current pandemic situation and lockdown forced the company to shut down. So we have no choice but to go back home in the rural area. We'll feel safe there because the situation in New Delhi is really bad, and that's the main reason for us to go back.
Kuwait has announced to bar entry for travelers from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal and Sri Lanka until further notice. As the continent's inoculation drive reaches a third of adults and COVID-19 infections ease, Europe is starting to reopen cities. England has recorded 0 daily COVID-19 deaths for the first time since July. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson set out the next phase of easing the lockdown.
But with deaths and hospitalisations at their lowest level since last July, the UK's 4 chief medical officers today agreeing a reduction in the alert level, the data now support moving to step 3 in England from next Monday, the 17th of May.
The US has authorized Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for use in children as young as 12. In Canada, more people are lining up for shots after Alberta opened up vaccines to everyone 12 years old and older. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization chief hoped that by December, the body's members will have reached a pragmatic solution over whether to waive COVID-19 vaccine patents.
In Pakistan, 113 more people have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the death toll has reached 19,106. It said over 3,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry has so far reported over 864,000 infections and more than 766,000 recoveries. Health officials say the number of active cases is approaching 79,000. Over 4,800 of them are critical. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have reviewed bilateral relations and the means to enhance them in different fields. Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah. Qatari state media said the two sides discussed regional and international developments and the efforts made in this regard. Sheikh Tamim is visiting Saudi Arabia for the first time since the declaration to ease a years-long rift with the kingdom and the other Gulf states. Saudi Arabia says a drone strike with the Yemen's Houthis on a border village in southern Jazan city caused damage to a house and cars. However, the Saudi Civil Defense said no injuries have been reported. Earlier, Saudi-led coalition in Yemen said it intercepted an explosives-laden boat south of the Red Sea. Coalition also said it destroyed an explosive drone that was fired at Abbas airport, but the Houthis claimed that they had hit an important target at the airport. Houthis have escalated irregular cross-border attacks on Saudi Arabia. Pro-democracy activists are holding protests across Myanmar to mark the 100th day since the military coup. In Yangon, people held a flash mob-style protest against the military rule. According to an activist group, the security forces have killed at least 281 civilians, including 52 children, in the crackdown on dissent so far. Meanwhile, Thailand police have arrested 3 Burmese journalists and 2 activists who fled the military ban. Police said they have been booked for illegal entry and face possible deportation. The Reporters News organization has urged the Thai authorities not to deport them due to serious danger. Russia has proposed discussing arms control at a possible meeting between President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. At a virtual UN conference, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow is still waiting for answers from Washington on a proposed summit. He added that strategic nuclear stability will be high on the agenda. Meanwhile, U.S. envoy on disarmament Robert Wood said preparations for the talks are underway. Earlier, Biden said he wanted to hold a summit with Putin during his trip to Europe in June. Relations between Moscow and Washington slumped to a new low in March after Biden called Putin a killer. In retaliation, Moscow recalled its ambassador to Washington for consultations. U.S. President Joe Biden says there is no evidence so far that Russia was involved in the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. Talking to reporters, U.S. President said there is, however, evidence that the ransomware is in Russia. Biden said that is why Moscow has some responsibility to deal with the attack. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the dark side ransomware forced the shutdown of the pipeline. Earlier, Colonial said it was moving towards a partial opening of its 8,850 kilometers of pipeline. On Friday, hackers locked down the company's IT systems, apparently demanding a significant amount of money in ransom. Ukraine says Russia still has around 100,000 troops deployed near its border and in annexed Crimea. This comes a day after President Vladimir Zelensky said Russia has not withdrawn military hardware from its border with Ukraine. The remarks echoed comments last week by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who said that significant troops were left behind. Blinken had also hinted an increased security assistance for Kiev. Last month, Moscow announced a withdrawal of forces from Ukrainian border after a standoff that alarmed the West. Romania has called for an increased NATO military presence in the south of the eastern flank. Romanian President Klaus Iohannis' statement comes after a summit of a group of 9 countries on the eastern edge of NATO. Iohannis said Russia's military buildup around the Black Sea and on the border with Ukraine was worrying. He said NATO must continue to strengthen its defense and deterrence posture. U.S. President Joe Biden and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also joined the virtual summit. The conference of the Bucharest 9 was aimed at coordinating the security positions ahead of a full NATO summit in June. The European Union is preparing the 4th round of sanctions against Belarus in response to last year's contested presidential election. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell chaired a meeting of the bloc's foreign ministers to discuss Belarus. He said the next sanctions package will be adopted in coming weeks. Diplomats said many more members of the bloc supported further curbs in the meeting. They said the sanctions could target as many as 50 people. They noted Brussels needed to gather sufficient evidence to provide legally solid listings. Ethiopia says the U.S. has affirmed unwavering commitment to facilitate an amicable solution to the Nile Dam dispute. Ethiopian Foreign Minister Demeke Mekonnen and U.S. Special Envoy Jeffrey Feltman discussed the matter in Addis Ababa. Ethiopia's Interior Ministry quoted Feltman as saying that Addis Ababa is a strategic partner of Washington. As the two sides discussed the Ethiopia-Sudan border dispute, while Demeke reiterated commitment to solving the matter peacefully. It added the Ethiopian Foreign Minister also briefed Feltman on the humanitarian and rehabilitation efforts in Restiv Tigray region. The UN says it is deploying rapid reaction units in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo to help contain armed groups. This comes days after President Felix Tshisekedi declared a state of siege in North Kivu and Ituri provinces. In an interview, UN official Jean-Pierre said the president's decision shows the government's plans to address insecurity. He added, the UN forces will continue to collaborate with the new military authorities appointed in the two provinces. During the 30-day state of siege, the provincial governments will be led by the military governor, with the police chief as a vice governor. In Colombia, a meeting between protest leaders and President Iván Duque has broken up without curbing the ongoing anti-government protests. Official data shows 24 people have died and over 800 injured since the start of the protests against police violence. The meeting was also attended by other government officials and representatives from the UN and the Catholic Church. Talking to media, protest leaders said the government had not shown empathy for their demands. They called for a nationwide strike on 12th of May to reinforce their demands. The government terms the talks exploratory and says it wants to reach an agreement with protesters. President Iván Duque visited Cali after weekend violence in the city left over a dozen people injured.
A ser sujetas del pisoteo de nadie.
No one can trample on the Constitution or the law. Our responsibility is not to act with brutality, but to act within the framework of all competencies and strict adherence to the protection of human rights, so that the city has all the guarantees and to avoid confrontations between citizens, or what is even worse, citizens who try to take control by their own hands.
China has called for deepening cooperation under the framework of Belt and Road Initiative to boost global economic recovery. Foreign Minister Wang Yi made these remarks while virtually attending the opening ceremony of the 5th Silk Road International Exposition in Xi'an. Wang noted China's BRI, signed with 140 countries, is on the fast track of the high-quality development. He said the project is becoming a model that restores economic activities and unlocks development potentials. Wang called on the BRI partners to focus on green initiatives to achieve sustainable development. Beijing's top diplomat also urged partners to work together to firmly uphold the multilateral trading system. China has reported the slowest population growth since the 1950s. The decline was revealed by the National Bureau of Statistics results of China's once-a-decade census. The data showed the population of mainland China increased 5.38% to 1.41 billion. The report reflects an average annual rise of 0.53%, down from 0.57% reported in the previous decade. There were officially 12 million babies born in 2020, marking an 18% decrease from 2019. The census also found the proportion of the citizens aged over 65 increased to 13.5%, while the proportion of children grew by 1.35%. At least 7 people have died after a landslide at a gold mine in Indonesia's West Sumatra. The local emergency department said 9 others have been rescued. Authorities said the landslide was triggered by torrential rains. Officials said the mine has been inundated with mud and debris, which halted a rescue operation. The disaster occurred just 2 weeks after 10 people were killed in another landslide at a hydropower project in North Sumatra. 19 years old Shahroz Kashif has become the youngest Pakistani to summit the world's highest peak, Mount Everest. It is his second successful attempt to scale a peak over 8,000 meters tall. The young climber has several local mountains to his name, including the Broad Peak, which he scaled at the age of 17. Kashif climbed almost 3,900 meters tall Makra Peak at the age of 11 in 2014. His latest achievement was to summit Kosar Ganj Peak last year. Legendary mountaineer Muhammad Ali Satpara is the only Pakistani to summit 8 out of the only 14 peaks that are over 8,000 meters tall. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. And now the business updates. The Wall Street stocks have dropped at open as investors fear rising inflation may push the Federal Reserve to tighten monetary policy. A decline in the share of Apple, Amazon and Facebook led to the Nasdaq Composite to trade over 1% lower, while the indices of S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average traded nearly 2% down. Meanwhile, the oil prices fell as pipeline outage weighs on the U.S. Gulf Coast refiners to cut output. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indusdotnews.